Good afternoon. My name is Leisa Thompson, and I'm the General Manager for the Metropolitan Council Environmental Services. My feet touch the ground in the great state of Minnesota, and I'm grateful to be part of this important work and to introduce you to the Workforce and Organizational Culture session. Where do utilities face most of their challenges when they're trying to improve their organizations? You can see from this survey that our utility partners were in agreement that people-related challenges are a top concern, followed closely by process challenges. It's been said that we need to change when it comes to how water is managed, because it's all one water. This famous Einstein quote reminds us, "You can't solve today's problems with the same thinking that created them." And I think that's also true for people challenges. On the last slide, you saw that technology concerns at 11% were significantly lower than people concerns at 46%. It should be surprising to all of us that we're living in a rapidly changing technology world, and yet we're more significantly challenged by people. Perhaps we're trying to solve those people challenges with the same thinking that created them. If we want to get unstuck and make progress with people challenges, we have to start with making a decision to change our thinking, or progress will be impossible. If you're still not convinced that we're stuck when it comes to people issues, consider two stark statistics. Organizational change success rates have been averaging 30% for decades, and employee engagement scores have also been hovering around 30% for decades. We need to ask ourselves, why have they been stuck for so long? And is there something in common besides the obvious that they're both people challenges? Leaders need to be adept at adapting because we are in the midst of the greatest velocity of change in human history. We can see that every successive era has been shorter than the previous, and we've gone from an era that lasted millions of years to the most recent information era lasting only decades. Today we are moving from the information era to the augmented era, but our mental models are already behind as they are still moving from industrial era to information era. Let's think of that in the context of the industrial era, which was characterized as steam, electricity, manufacturing, and computerization, with leaders focused on efficiency and driving productivity. In those contexts, the human was a depersonalized unit of productivity. We need to adapt our leadership for the era that we are in. Leaders who will be successful today and in the future will be able to establish psychological safety, engender trust, and engage humans based upon shared purpose and mission. Thinking about the industrial era and the information era in the context of culture, there's a large contrast between the mental models. So the leader should reshape the shared everyday habits of the organization. If those leaders have adapted their mental models and thinking, that each of these culture characteristics should have a before and an after. For example, with decision making. How did the organization make decisions before, and how do they do it today? If it hasn't changed, then it's time to ask why not. Who do we choose to be as leaders? Using an iceberg serves as a useful model in raising awareness of underlying dynamics that shape behaviors. Others can observe an individual's behavior and the results of the behavior, but the accompanying emotions and thinking are not visible. There are two things to keep in mind with this. If an individual wants to have a different behavior, they have to start with different thinking. And relationships with others are built on the expectations about each other's future behaviors based on past interactions. So leaders need to be sharply aware that their observable behaviors are what establishes relationships with others and ultimately organizational culture. Here's an organizational iceberg model, useful for raising awareness on what's below the surface and driving the behaviors and cultures so you can identify what needs to shift for changes to stick. If you don't look below the surface, you're destined to continue to react to events. You have to look below the surface to influence systemic change. Starting with patterns of behavior, if you can see a pattern, you can identify a trend that's taken place over time. And then knowing that pattern of behavior will help you understand what kinds of systemic structures will be needed to reinforce a different behavior. But most importantly, your greatest transformational opportunity can come from recognizing a mental model that's holding back change. For example, a leader with power who doesn't think it's possible to get everyone to agree on a decision will seek to avoid collaborative decision-making processes. Let's shift our focus to what science tells us about thinking and adapting our mental models and behaviors. It isn't easy, but it is possible to shift thinking, and if leaders understand and apply neuroscience to how they lead, the organization should significantly improve their performance, make change happen and adapt faster, bring out the best in others, and become an inclusive organization that attracts diversity. Let's start by raising our awareness of the physiology that impacts our ability to notice and manage social threats before they hijack us and cause us to behave in less effective ways. What do social threats have in common with physical threats? It turns out there's a lot in common because our brain's survival instincts do not distinguish between social and physical threats. This can be seen with these brain images showing on the top row images of brain activity with social threats are very similar to the bottom row images of brain activity with physical threats. To understand where we face a great deal of our social threats in the workplace, let's turn to meetings, where the quality of the conversation sets the stage for high performance. This looks like a peaceful and potentially productive group, but imagine how that could be disrupted if just one of these dogs displayed this behavior. The scene would likely become chaotic. Humans, on the other hand, are not that transparent when it comes to social threats. An individual feeling a social threat will experience unobservable physical reactions that interferes with their creative thinking and their contribution to the discussion. Let's look at what can create a social threat for humans and how to avoid it. Amy Edmondson, author of Fearless Organizations, conducted research on social threats in the workplace and makes a good case for its importance to organizational performance. Avoiding social threats in the workplace became the positive expression of achieving high levels of psychological safety, which she describes as a climate in which people are comfortable expressing and being themselves. She sums it up for leaders with this table and this quote: "Making the workplace safe for open communication about challenges, concerns, and opportunities is one of the most important leadership responsibilities in the 21st century. More specifically, when people have psychological safety at work, they feel comfortable sharing concerns and mistakes without fear of embarrassment or retribution. They are confident that they can speak up and won't be humiliated, ignored, or blamed. They know they can ask questions when they are unsure about something, and they tend to trust and respect their colleagues. When an environment has a reasonably high psychological safety, good things happen. Mistakes are reported quickly so that prompt corrective action can be taken. Seamless coordination across groups or departments is enabled, and potentially game-changing ideas for innovation are shared. In short, psychological safety is a crucial source of value creation in organizations operating in this complex and challenging world. When both psychological safety and performance standards are low, as you can see in this chart, the workplace becomes a kind of apathy zone. People show up at work, but their hearts and minds are elsewhere, and they choose self-protection over exertion every time. When performance standards are high, but psychological safety is low, as in the lower right quadrant of this chart, employees are anxious about speaking up, and both work quality and workplace safety will suffer. Now that we've seen how significant psychological safety is, here's a SCARF acronym to help you remember the triggers for social threats, starting with S for status, which is about our relative importance to others. We always want to protect our status, so we will constantly be paying attention and try and avoid doing something that would leave a bad impression. C is for certainty, and that's about being able to predict the future. Our brains want prediction. So for instance, if we don't have a clear agenda at a meeting, our brain will spend energy and attention trying to anticipate what lies ahead that you might not be prepared for. A is for autonomy, and that's our sense of control over events. It's our human nature to be self-directing and to have a say in decisions or events. If we feel forced, our alarms will go off. R is for relatedness, and that's our sense of safety with others. This is easily undermined if we have a poor relationship with others in the meeting, or if we feel that individuals are ignoring our viewpoint, or that we're not being appreciated for our contributions. The last one is F, and that's fairness. It's our perception of fair exchanges between people or processes. And don't underestimate this as a strong threat. If people feel a process was unfair, they often will contest the results, even though they had been in agreement with the results initially. Now let's take a look at the neuroscience behind why it's so hard to change even when you want to. No one wants to be accused of not walking the talk, but those who are leading today with behaviors that reflect an outdated mental model are likely to be seen that way. Humans are complex, and our survival relies on some important aspects of how our brains work, but that also adds to the challenge of changing our behaviors. 95% of our day consists of behaviors that are reflexive or habits that come from our subconscious brain activity. The subconscious brain is widely considered by many as the most powerful part of our brain, and it can do multiple tasks at a time. The subconscious brain is also 1,000,000 times faster processing speed and is more energy efficient than the conscious brain. So clearly, our subconscious brain has the advantage over our conscious brain, which means that if we're going to successfully change a habit, we need to make a decision to change it. And then we need a plan to unlearn and replace the old habit. This gets even more challenging if we feel a social threat in trying to behave in the new way, because that gives the control back to the subconscious brain, and before you even have a chance to consider stopping it, the reflexive behavior has already happened. As you consider the challenge that we all face in becoming the leaders that our organizations need today, there are some very good reasons to take heart, and they're all around you, because the greatest invention of all time is a group of people working with a shared purpose. We can help each other change our habits when we share that common ground.